Hey everyone, Matt here with Nightrun Studio. For the last 2 months, I have been swimming in a Stygian sea of code and user interfaces as I attempted to add an inventory and equipment system to my game. This was, without a doubt, the hardest thing I've done so far. But with the work more or less behind me now, as I look back on it, I have to admit that the effort was worth it.
Let me show you. First, I should tell you that I love gear. I love the feel of progression, the sight of stats going up, the feel of phenomenal cosmic power, and I especially love watching the player's appearance change as I gear him up from a total wimp to a hulking ball of death incarnate.
I don't know what it is. Maybe I just needed to play with more Barbies as a kid, but there's something special about equipping gear to your character and watching the visual changes as you change out their armor and shirt and weapons.
I think this is part of why I loved MMOs like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy back in the early 2000s. It's also something that drives me nuts about a lot of console RPGs, where you can't change your appearance. Some designer decides the main character needs to have a metallic crop top, and now you're stuck looking at it for the duration of a 60-hour playthrough. So, gear swapping is a non-negotiable for Willard. But before I can even think about how that's going to work, I have to figure out my inventory system. Back in December, I teased a working inventory system in my 6 months devlog, but that was a little deceiving. I had a working system, but barely. In reality, it was full of bugs, overly complicated, and hard to modify. After releasing that devlog, I sat down and tried to create my own system. That one didn't make it much farther than a blank canvas. So I turned to Sunny Valley's tutorial series. This series is amazing, but it's also 23 tutorials long. I made it to about 18 before I encountered a game-breaking bug that I just couldn't fix, so I started over. This time, I better understood the code. I added my own sprites to give it a little bit of visual appeal. I made it to about video 21 before it broke this time. Third try, I finally made it to the end. I felt like a beast, like the Godzilla of code, until I tried to add an equipment menu and realized that to do this properly, I'd have to build in those pieces right from the start.
I kid you not, right now, I am restarting my entire UI system. All 23 tutorials of it for the 4th time.
Fourth try was the charm. I made it to the end of the 23rd tutorial, breathed a deep sigh of relief that everything was working and that I hadn't encountered any game-breaking bugs. I even had the prototype for an equipment system. Only one slot was set up, but it worked. My inventory and equipment systems were finished-ish. You see, my scripts had ballooned, and I found I was having to draw diagrams to keep them straight. The maze of code was unwieldy, and even though it worked, it was pretty cumbersome to adapt. I tried to switch my focus to the next step, adding animations, swapping gear. That's when the wheels fell off. You see, there's two main ways that 2D games swap sprites. One is to animate using a rigging style of animation. You chop your player into pieces, and you just rotate and move those pieces to give the feel of movement. A good example of this would be Plants vs. Zombies series. This is a huge time saver, as once you've animated all your poses, you can just swap in new gear sprites, and you don't have to animate them. Here, you can see me using this method for my weapons. It's quick, efficient, and once you're done, it's easy to add more weapons to your arsenal. The second animation option is to animate every single pose for every single piece of gear, one by one. Yep, that's the method I chose for most of my gear. Turns out there's a reason that so many games don't have swappable in-game sprites. Also turned out that my 4th iteration of the equipment system wasn't going to support this new feature. I lived in denial for a day or two, but the writing was on the wall. I was going to have to start this over again.
I'm gonna level with you. A little piece of me died in that moment. But it's not like I'm gonna give up on this game, and gear swapping is non-negotiable, so
I opened a new scene in Unity and started over. This time, I decided to use my tried and true method. Just like I did for my combat system, I decided to make a tutorial series. I would design my own inventory and equipment system, research and test them, and then get to know them intimately by breaking them down into bite-sized pieces for a tutorial series. I did the inventory system first. It ended up being 9 videos long, but my code was clean, powerful, and easily adaptable. By the end of the series, I had a few viewers requesting that I make a series on equipment systems. At the time, I wasn't too sure that I'd go for this as it was going to be a big job, and I wasn't certain I wanted to spend that much time on a video series that would take time away from developing Willard.
But then one viewer made the suggestion that I start a Patreon campaign to fund this series. This got me thinking. Down the road, I might need to do something like this in order to make it through the final sprint for Willard, so why not use this as a training ground? I can figure out how to make a Patreon page, how the marketing and tiers work, how to funnel money and all of that sort of stuff. And who knows, if I was lucky, maybe somebody would decide to buy me a cup of coffee. Now, keep in mind that I have a full-time job as a teacher. I have a family, I run a YouTube channel, and I am trying to make a video game here. Not exactly swimming in free time to work on a marketing campaign. That said, I created a Patreon page. I got a few tiers kind of thrown together and some motivations to join them. And I created a post advertising this new series. With all that groundwork done, I put out the word on Twitter and YouTube that this was happening and sat back and waited. And waited. And waited. Yeah, so my first fundraising attempt wasn't exactly an amazing success. At the end of the day, I did manage to get one subscriber, thanks to Daniel Lee for your support for the series. But at the very least, this showed me that somebody cared enough about my project in order to actually put some money into it, and that was pretty encouraging. I've definitely got a lot to learn before I start a fundraising campaign for Willard, but this was a good first stab at it, and it taught me a lot.
And again, I was thrilled with how clean and powerful my code was. I also designed this system with gear swapping animations in mind. Now, this is still a lot of work. I'll give you a little picture into my process. First of all, I break each character sprite into its individual parts. For example, I've got a base body pose, which is naked, but I also need another body pose, which I can animate with clothes, and then paper doll them on top of the player. Once all of my naked animations are ready, I then set them up in my animator, which controls which animations will play when. You can see here that I have layers for each body part. Although they all have the same structure, when I click on the individual poses, like this idle pose, you can see that the body has one animation, the legs have another one, and on and on. To keep my animator looking clean, I've also created these sub-animation states, like this jumping one, where you can click on it and find even more animations. With my naked animations created and my animator set up, I can now start creating gear. This means drawing out each pose for each body part, for each piece of gear. Yeah, that's gonna take some time. Next, I import the images into Unity, and then open up my sprite editor, where I slice them into individual parts, and then name each part so that I can find it later. With that done, I'm ready to make the animations themselves. So I can go into Martin's animation folder, find his body, and then go into the traveler shirt. Here I have an animation prepared for every single pose that I need to animate the shirt in. For example, I can click on body idle, and then start placing individual images on my timeline to create the idle animation for the traveler shirt. Now I just have to do this for the other 17 poses. Once that's all done, I can go back to my animator, go to the body layer, click on idle, and put this animation in place. Finally, I'll use a script I wrote called the Animation Override Manager. This script stores all of the naked poses for each of my characters, so that when I take off their gear, they can revert back to their naked state. For the gear itself, I've created a scriptable object that stores all the data for each item. Here, I can set the item's name, its stats, and I can store all of the animations that belong to it. Now, in the game, whenever I collect a new piece of equipment, the information about which animations to apply are automatically loaded. So when I equip the traveler shirt, it knows to override the naked animations with the animations that I just made for the shirt. Needless to say, this is going to be a mountain of work. But as you can see here, I've got a good foundation. Now in the evenings, if I'm watching TV with the fam, I'll do some low-key animating while we're at it. I often find that in one evening I can animate a single piece of gear. So it's only going to take me like 500 more nights and I should be like partway done? Well, that about sums up the last 2 months. I did add some support for player swapping. I can now move freely between Willard and my new character Martin, and each time I change characters, my inventory changes to match them. I now have most of my basic systems up and running, and I'm excited to do some level building now. I also have some really amazing ideas for the defense and city building parts of Willard. I can't wait for summer to hit, so I can devote a little more time to those aspects of the game.
Anyways, I think that about does it for now. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. Until next time, this is Matt here with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.